I'm Carlos Afonso. I'm your coordinator, the training coordinator of the master. Many of you already know me from other webinars or have been interacting with me through the forum. And today we are doing the first webinar of the simulation of Tremante. So let me, in 5–10 minutes, explain a bit of what is this simulation. It's a pilot project, so it's the first time that we are doing it in Kalu. And it is an scenario that runs in parallel with the modules of the master. So the idea is that for each module that you are studying in the master, for each module that you find in the virtual classroom, you will find a simulation, a parallel simulation in the Facebook page in anonymous sender with the scenario of Tremante. So it's a country, it's a complex crisis, country prone to natural disasters, also with a conflict that we will develop further later. And in this first month of a scenario, we have seen that there was an earthquake, a powerful earthquake, even if the information coming from the field was not very complete or very accurate, but we have enough information to see that there is a big earthquake. And what is expected from us as Kalu students, but also as responders, as humanitarian workers, is to provide a swift response, an appropriate response. And this is what this workshop, what this webinar is about. So this scenario, you have to take it as a one more learning resource. It completes what we are seeing in the master. And today, for the presentation, we have with us Iñigo, is Ignacio Cristobal, alias Iñigo, is one of the senior collaborators of Kalu. Iñigo has worked with us in the preparation of the contents of the masters, and it works as a consultant for Kalu very often. And he is also an expert on humanitarian issues. Is now working with UNICEF, but has been working as emergency response and other capacities of humanitarian aid. So for these practical issues, you should keep your micro mute, and then by the end, you can raise your hand when you want to make a question. And we will go first through the presentation of Iñigo, and then there will be a session of Q&A, questions and answers. And the other thing that you can do as well is to go to the chat of the Zoom and introduce yourselves, telling us who are you, which country are you coming from, and to see what kind of audience we have. And now I stop here and I give the floor to Iñigo. Iñigo, go ahead with the presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Carlos. First of all, I would like to confirm, can you hear me clearly, clear and loud, or loud and clear? Okay.
Yes,
excellent. Sir. Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, first of all, it's a real pleasure for me to be here, thanks to Kalu Institute. As Carlos was sharing, I've been collaborating with Kalu since a few years now. First of all, supporting the director of Kalu, Alberto, with the development of some of the modules, the contents. A few years after, being supporting some of the sessions, and now I've been doing random collaborations because I'm more or less most of my time working for UNICEF in Latin America and the Caribbean region in preparedness and disaster response for UNICEF offices all across the region. During my career, my professional career, I had the opportunity also to be in different contexts, including different continents. I've been working in Africa at the beginning of my career, and countries like Mozambique, South Africa, South Sudan, Ethiopia. also in Latin America and the Caribbean, Nicaragua, Colombia, both in natural disasters, or bad call natural disasters, but also internal conflicts and civil wars. And also doing some consultancies in Asia, in Malaysia, Bangladesh, Thailand, and other countries. Okay, so but let's stop talking about myself. The intention of this session is not to do a presentation, but I rather prefer if you allow me to have a conversation, an open, flexible conversation with you, because I know that most of you, or maybe I should say all of you, have a lot of experience in the humanitarian sector. You are already working at different levels in your countries within different kind of organizations, UN agencies, local NGOs, international NGOs, Red Cross, Red Crescent, and other. You know? So I would like that we share experiences. I will put some questions on the floor, and then from there I would like you to participate. To feel free to do it, opening your micro and speaking up. Or if you don't feel comfortable speaking up, you can put your questions or your reflections and insights also in the chat. So it's up to you which way you prefer to participate today. Having said that, and Carlos was mentioning Tremante. I don't know if all of you who joined today, you've been getting into Facebook with Tremante, reading and participating in the different posts and information that we've been providing about Tremante, the earthquake, in Tremante. But if you didn't, that's not a problem, because the conversation we are having today, the joint reflection, you don't need necessarily to be familiarized with Tremante, but it's just to share your thoughts and experiences in your day-to-day work, okay? But for those who are familiarized with Tremante, I would like to, one second, I would like to remember a bit where we are in Tremante now. As you know, during October, during the past month, we've been sharing with you information about how the scenario, the disaster in Tremante was evolving. And I'm sharing with you here in this slide some of the key information, the latest information on the context and humanitarian situation and humanitarian needs in Tremante. As you can read there, Marcanda Airport, which is the capital, the main city in Tremante, has limited capacity and only small aircrafts can land. We got already confirmed, which is huge numbers of people affected. 110,000 people died, 30,000 disappeared, 145,000 injured, more than 1 million affected, and so on. As you can see there, we got also problems in WAS facilities, which are destroyed 45%. In terms of education, we got primary schools 120 destroyed, 21 secondary schools, and 36 preschools, which are not functional. 800,000 people in urban areas need immediate food aid. I mean, the cases of acute diarrheic diseases increased by 40%, especially in under 5 children. And we know that some cases of sexual abuse are happening, and harassment in temporary shelters. That's the context in Tremante. Now, why am I sharing with you this information? I mean, the main reason is because I would like you to, for a while, to forget about your own countries, your own experience, countries where you usually work, and put yourself in this made up imaginary country, Tremante, and tell me, and looking at this information, think for 1 minute, how do you imagine what's going on, or what's happening in Tremante now? Only with information you got on the screen. How do you imagine that the different UN agencies, the governmental institutions, local NGOs, international NGOs, what they might be doing? How do they feel about the situation? What are, in your opinion, according to these numbers, the priorities, the main needs? what do you think the different stakeholders and humanitarian agencies should be doing at this point? Let's put in the situation that it's been only no more than 1 week since the earthquake happened in Tremante, just to give you the timeline. So if you reflect and you put yourselves in this context of Tremante, then I would like to, and let's say that we are at the stage of doing the first assessment or the Rapidness Assessment. And from your own experience, what are the main priority actions that should be happening during the first 72 hours of this disaster? I was telling you that we are in the first week, still in the first week. Imagine that we are already we are still, if you go back few days back, no, you go a few days back, imagine yourselves that you are in the first 24, 48 hours, up to 72 hours in Tremante after the earthquake. And now I'm giving the word to you. What are, in your opinion, the most priority actions that in this context of the earthquake in Tremante should be happening within the first 3 days, 4 days, and why? So, and what are the main challenges, constraints that you might be facing at this stage in Tremante? Reflect for a few seconds on these two questions, and feel free to open your mic to speak and share verbally your thoughts and your inputs with us, or in the chat if you feel more comfortable writing down your inputs in the chat. Okay, so take 1 minute, make your own notes, and we will start sharing. And you are free, please. I encourage you to share your thoughts. Someone has the mic open. Could you please help me to mute your mic? Or whoever has the host, I think it's Kalu Institute, they can do it. Okay. And one thing that is very important is that I know that most of you got experience, that you are playing different roles within your own organizations and your own institutions. And it may happen that some of the people who are here today, they feel they don't have enough experience, although they are doing the master, but they still need to get experience or to get an opportunity with a humanitarian agency, soever. But this webinar is for everyone. It's not only for those who have the experience to serve, but also for those who would like to know about others' experience, but also who have an opinion about what might be happening in Tremante, regardless they for any other reason didn't have the opportunity to go to the field, or they didn't have the opportunity to work for a humanitarian agency. So everyone here in this webinar is very much welcome to share her thoughts and to share their opinions.
Aden Abdullahi has his hand raised. He wants to.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. Carlos, yeah, that's great. If you could monitor the hands, and I can monitor the chat. Okay, so please go ahead. Who is first? Please introduce yourself. 1 second, Mohammed. Introduce yourself, but just very quickly by saying your name, which country or countries are you coming from, and what do you do quickly if you got a position or a role in any organization. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. My name is Aden Abdullahi Ali from Somalia. I currently work with ACTED as a senior MNE monitoring and evaluation officer. To go straight to the question for the Tremante, I think in the 72 hours, what we need, in my opinion, is the health profession of health services because of the following reasons. One, because of there are some cases of sexual abuse that has been reported. And due to now this nature of the disaster that has hit now in this region, the cases now of sexual abuse that has been reported need an intervention. That's why I was bringing up the issue of health services, the provision of health services. And due to also the nature of also the disaster that has happened here, we also need an immediate cash intervention for the rich people, to the people who can be reached. And the challenge that I take up with the health facility is that the airport is not accessible, as said, and maybe there are very hard areas that can be reached. And with these now hard areas, the people who are living there, we might not reach them because of either the roads are not probably has been destroyed because of this disaster, and the people have also been scattered all around, and reaching the required or the needy people might be also difficult. And in that, one thing I will have encouraged is that the local authority to or the leaders to be also involved in this case so as to reach now those in need. And I believe that once we involve the stakeholders to also help us trace that those people who are being seriously affected, that will also help us a lot in reaching those people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Aden, for your thoughts and your insights. I will take a couple, if you allow me, a couple of three interventions of words, if you allow me, and then I will react to some of the things, the thoughts you shared with us. Okay, Aden. But first, if we got someone else who wants to join the analysis, this sharing of thoughts. As I said before, can be speaking up, or just you can write down your reflections or inputs in the chat. While we are waiting, I see your. No, I don't see anyone else. So I will take then. I mean, Aden, absolutely right, and I agree with you on all the inputs you gave. If I understood well, and correct me if I'm wrong, most of your inputs were related to what you think is needed in terms of priorities and the immediate humanitarian response. No, you were mentioning the sexual harassment situation with some cases. You were mentioning health facilities. You were mentioning other vulnerable groups in need. But you mentioned something that, if you allow me, I would like to challenge. No? Challenge in a positive way. Eh? Don't misunderstand me. And it's about cash transfer, cash intervention. If I tell you that Tremante, you don't have a social protection system strong enough to do cash interventions, coordinating and working together with government institutions, and that the possibility of having individual platforms from WFP of other agencies or NGOs, experts, or who have a preference for cash transfer of cash interventions. Do you really think that we are in the position to do cash interventions, or to think of cash interventions within the first 2-3 days? I'm challenging and asking you, Aden, if you allow me.
Thank you so much. I feel that with the help of the local leaders in place, and because in every aspect or in every community might have either a religious leaders or community leaders or any kind of a leader that is can be reached at any time in that situation. But as a challenge, which I already enlightened it, is that it's very hard to reach those people who had suffered, because we might not be able to know the magnitude of the disaster of those who had reached. So in such people who are have no, or maybe that are less affected by the crisis, might get an opportunity or interventions. But I believe that if at all that we encourage the presence of the leaders, either community leaders or the religious leaders at all, I believe that we can at least reach a good number of people who are being affected by the disaster. Though I believe that the priority needed at first is about provision of health services like medications for those who are destroyed, injured, and who had been sexually harassed.
Okay, Aden, thank you very much for your clarification.
Just 1 minute. Remember to give access to people that is waiting in the waiting room. Just,
Okay. Well, so we got another hand raised. Mohammed. It was there. It's not there anymore. Mohammed?
Yeah.
I know there are various Mohammed. It's one of them. Was
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm about.
Okay, so please, Mohammed, introduce yourself very briefly, and then you can share with us your question or your thoughts. Go ahead.
And I'm Muhammad Sirat Hussein, Kalu student. I'm currently working in humanitarian organizations, currently working in Jubaland. And if I go to direct to my view, about what I want to say is about the disaster that is currently going on in Somalia. There's poor and there's disaster that is going to Somalia currently, and that is the most affected area. Is the most affected disasters that are currently going is two issues. One, the two emergencies is drought and also insecurity. One, drought is actually affected mostly in Jubaland area in lower Chupa and middle Chupa. That is the worst areas. And also there's in insecurity that's going for Galmudug region, where there's a lot of displacement, thousands of displacement that are occurred in the area. And when I come back to the drought really affected the area, and there is need of emergency intervention in those areas, especially lower Juba and middle Juba. But the middle Juba mostly is not safe, where no one can access that area. The accessibility of middle Juba is very hard because currently Al-Shabaab is ruling that area. I don't think so. Humanitarians, unless those people can be displaced, I don't think so. There's access to that, to reach that area. The issue of the issue of Galmudug region, where there's this war in between the government and a team called Helisuna. I don't know. There's thousands of displacements that occur. When this displacement occur, there must be those protection area. It will be very risky. Maybe there's a lot of rape cases. There's a lot of misuse of power in the area when this displacement occur.
Okay.
And
Mohammed, can you hear me? May I interrupt you there for a while? Because you mentioned already a couple of things, yeah, in your context that are quite interesting. And I would like you to share with us, from your experience, some of you, I mean, maybe some recommendations or your insights about a couple of things you already mentioned. I mean, if I understood well, you mentioned security as one key factor, no? Security linked to humanitarian access, no? And the difficulties that you are facing in your context on a day-to-day basis to guarantee the humanitarian access of the humanitarian community and having the security guaranteed not only for the humanitarian workers and the humanitarian professionals, but also for the host population or to the target population affected by the situation there. No, in that context, where humanitarian access is an issue and is a concern, and where security is a real problem, what are you doing from your organization to overcome, to face those situations? Because we are talking about Tremante, which is a made-up country, and you are talking about the real life, which is really dramatic, though that's context, the situation. And obviously, in the first hours of any disaster, looking at the humanitarian access and security is also very important. No, but you were giving us an example from real life, which is very important. What are you doing? If you could share with us one or two ideas of actions that you are implementing to deal with a situation of lack of security or unsecure environment and humanitarian access. One or two thoughts sharing with us your experience. Is that possible, Mohammed?
And yeah, what I can. For issue of insecurity and humanitarian access is really the hardest part in Somalia. And actually, these things is really affecting. That's why most of the Somalis are dying in this disaster, because of this less of humanitarian access and I don't know, mostly the humanitarians, when they're implementing such areas and that certain project, they use local people. But the problem is confirming that project or this intervention has reached the right people. It will be also very hard to monitor these projects.
Yeah.
That's one of the challenges. That's one of the challenges. We give the project to the local people, maybe a local organization, whatever you call it. But the issue of monitoring is another challenge. Is this intervention went to the right people or went to the wrong people?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's the dilemma sometimes, and you are right. Sometimes you need to put on the table and to make choices, and to assume that if you want to address the needs and the dramatic situation on people affected, sometimes you need to also to assume that it may happen that part of that humanitarian aid is not arriving to the right people. You should also assume some levels of local corruption from local authorities, even from local organizations. Why not? But in the end, for me, if you allow me to share my own experience, because I've been also in similar situations in the past, is that you need to put in a balance the final target. And if you are saving lives, if you, through your humanitarian aid, you are reaching people who may die if your support is not arriving, you really need to take those risks. You really need to assume, if you cannot avoid that because you cannot control everything in those contexts, and you really need to assume that sometimes part of the humanitarian aid will not reach to the people. But if at least, let's say 70%, 80%, 50% of the humanitarian aid is arriving, and there is not another mean to get that humanitarian aid through the borders, through the military controls to get to the right people, you need to assume that. And allow me to share very quickly a similar experience I had when I was working in Bosnia a few years ago. We were with UNHCR. We were implementing partners of UNHCR. I was working for a Spanish NGO, and we were running a convoy with more than 20 trucks of humanitarian aid to the enclave, to the famous, probably you heard about.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
To the famous enclave or Srebrenica in Bosnia. Yeah. And when we were just getting into the Muslim enclave there, the convoy with the 20 trucks was stopped by the military control, by the Serbians, and they were very clear. you give us 5 of your trucks and you don't pass through your humanitarian aid. And in the end, after a few hours of negotiation, the UNHCR officer calling to headquarters, calling to Belgrade at the different instances, in the end, they have to accept. And that was the situation. Either you give us 5 trucks to pass through 15, or you pass not a single truck to the people in Srebrenica. So you got to make choices in those situations, okay? Okay, good. Anyone else wants to share something about what's, I mean, we got now inputs, or I mean, about just to recall, we got inputs about things that should happen within the first hours. We got different examples of immediate humanitarian aid, about health, about trying to do cash interventions of cash transfers if we got the conditions through local stakeholders. We got this intervention about humanitarian access, security, how we can find difficult situations in those senses, and we need to assess and to know how we can operate under those constraints and circumstances. Anything else that you think should be happening within the first hours? What about needs assessment? Is that something that sounds familiar to you? Can anyone tell me something about needs assessment? Which kind of needs assessment could we do the first hours? Why, in the context of Tremante or in any other context? But let's fix, I mean, let's keep our focus in Tremante, in our fake made up country. What would you do in terms of assessment, needs assessment? Do we need to do something? Anyone else wants to participate? We got 2 people who already shared with us their thoughts. Anyone else? You can do it, as I said. I mean, we got more than 9, 10 participants. Please feel free to participate. You don't need to speak up if you don't want. You can do it in the chat. No? You can write down your thoughts, inputs, questions. Okay, I see one hand. Another, is this a new one, Aden, from you?
I just wanted to light something about the need assessment.
Yes, please, go ahead, Aden.
Thank you so much. I believe that need assessment at this stage is very important and very critical, and it helps a lot. And in my past experience in Somalia, where I'm currently working, when such disaster happens, is that need assessment is actually needed. So we also need to find out the magnitude of the disaster that happened. With this now that we normally speak to the local authorities, or as well as the local leaders who have very much knowledge in the context of where the disaster had happened. If we are able to also trace the victims of also the disaster, is also something very much helpful. And in this now, we normally conduct KIS, key informant interviews, where now that we go ahead with the people who have a background, or maybe can give you a clear overview of how the disaster and how it has hit, and the number of people who had been affected, and the kind of urgent interventions maybe they are proposing it, and all that. That will also be very much helpful. With that now, that we also need to balance on our responses, or when we are interviewing these people, we also need to also interview some female respondents, and also male respondents, and also some local authorities, and who have also knowledge about the area, and as well as the victims. When we gather those information, and in this need assessment, we tackle with different kind of interventions. Maybe we talk of some structured questions about the WASH assessments, and structured questions about the food security and livelihoods, and some about the shelter, and and as well as now that the generally sanitations and hygiene, and as well as now that the political aspect and how is it happening, and maybe that where also locations where now that the sites or the areas where now that has been heavily affected by the crisis. So once we get all this information, we come back to the table, analyze our data, and maybe from there we can get a clear strategy on which intervention is urgently needed in that area.
Okay, thank you, Aden. We got in the chat. I mean, what you share with us is clear, and it's part of the needs assessment process, no? With different techniques, methodologies, tools, no, that you were explaining to us that you use to gather and to get the necessary information, and also involving local stakeholders, no, people who are in the field and who can give us first-hand information, no, who know what's going on and how the disaster or the event affected in a certain geographical area. But we got also in the chat someone who is suggesting, and I think it's a very, very good suggestion, is about doing a first assessment to know the magnitude, no, of the disaster using drones, no, and open channels. And this is very interesting because more and more humanitarian agencies or humanitarian actresses, stakeholders, we are using or trying to use new technology, you know, satellite pictures, you know, use of drones. I mean, in some countries it's not that easy, as you know, because it's forbidden by authorities and by the local legislation, no? But in other countries, the use of drones is allowed, and it can provide a lot of information in the first assessment. And I would like, if you allow me, to take advantage of this suggestion of use of drones to make a difference between two stages, at least two stages of the initial assessment, no, the needs assessment. What we can call the rapid needs assessment and the complementary full multi-sectoral assessment, no? I mean, organizations call it in different ways, yeah? And the rapid needs assessment, according to my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is the one that is happening within the first maximum 72 hours. I mean, depends on the magnitude of the disaster, but usually it happens between the first 24 and 72 hours. And in most cases, it's based in secondary information provided from our partners, stakeholders, or local authorities, civil protection, civil defense, through different channels, no? And this rapid needs assessment is happening more and more in many countries through the use of new technologies, satellite pictures, use of drones and other technologies that allow us to get as much reliable information as possible within the first hours. Because as we know, it's very, very, very difficult to get to the field, an assessment team within the first hours, because there is kind of bureaucracy in different organizations, and you need to gather the team of experts. You need to check and to put in place the necessary logistics to send the assessment team to the field. And while all those things happen, it may take 1 week or maybe more that you put an assessment team of experts in the field. So that's why we got the rapid needs assessment, which is based on stakeholders, people, actors, organizations, government who are already in the field, who are already in the place where the disaster happened. And with that information, we need to make decisions. I mean, we need to make the first decisions, okay? And probably will not be the most accurate decisions because there is lack of information. But we need to work with that, because depending on our decisions, I mean, probably, let's say that from our decisions, the lives of many people may depend, and that's clear. And we could save life if we make decisions quickly. And sometimes we are forced to make decisions the first hours, the first days, without enough information. And we need to rely on the information we have. And we need to work with estimations. And we need to work with previous information baseline we might have from the context and make those estimations of projections of data, numbers, and figures. No? And that's the way we need to do the first hours. But after we got, and we must do a complementary full assessment, as Adi was putting some examples. We need to go to the field. We need to go with the right people. We need to go with a multidisciplinary team, and we need to gather all the information, all the necessary information, okay? So that would be my thoughts, no? Couple of things about how I see, according to my experience and others people's experience, the needs assessment, no? At least 2 stages. The rapidness assessment, which in most cases relies on secondary information that we can gather from different sources, and the complementary full assessment, needs assessment, that is happening a few days later, and in that one we can send people to the field. This doesn't mean that we cannot send our own people to the field the first hours. If we got the logistics, if we got the capacity, if we got the means, of course, we send our people to the field. But in most of the disasters, it does not that easy. It's not that easy, and we cannot send our teams the first 24 hours, the first 48 hours to the field, as you know from your own experience. I don't know if you agree with me on this quick thought reflection, or you would like to add something, or you disagree. Please, you are free to disagree. This is just my own experience, okay?
Yes, so what I just wanted was about through phone calls and by reaching this, because either getting in touch through the other humanitarian organizations working in the area or present in the areas where now that the disaster had happened. So, and gathering this, I know it would be very hard that to go in the 72 hours or through physical visits at the sites of the disaster, but through by other means like phone calls and on that, we'll contacting with the local stakeholders. That will be something I was thinking of, but presence in that would be very hard, because it might also affect the staff or the expatriates going to the field.
Thank you, Aden. Absolutely. And we got other input here from Mariama. I'm not Osman. I'm not in. If I am pronouncing well, sorry if I'm not. What is suggesting is, I mean, the most. I mean, for the first 72 hours. Firstly, send an immediate medication and support and control and decrease the spreading of acute diarrhea. Absolutely, to prevent cholera and other diseases that may arise from there. Absolutely right with that. And also supply food, to those communities that may not have food for the first hours. That's clear. Thank you for those inputs, and that's part of the we call normally the immediate humanitarian response. But this is the humanitarian aid that we are providing the first hours, the first days, and after we will send. We have a different, a more a complementary, let's say, humanitarian support aid. But the humanitarian, we need to choose very carefully which actions are priority and are the priority for those first hours. And here Mariama is suggesting a couple of them. In some cases, food might not be, I'm not saying in this case, in the case of Tremante, but what I've seen in my experience, that in some cases, food is not necessarily the first need, food aid, because people, in some cases, they got food at home, in an earthquake, unless they cannot get into their houses, that might happen, they may have food for at least 2, 3, 4 days, okay? Because they got food storage in their homes, okay? But what I've seen in earthquakes and in this kind of, they are of a high magnitude disasters, is that people are more concerned about finding their family, finding their loved ones, beloved ones, finding their friends, their neighbors, because they don't know where they are. They don't know if they are alive, if they dead, if they are under you know, the destruction, and they are still alive, and the search and rescue teams are still working the first days, the first hours, no? And for some people, the first aid would be more like psychosocial, psychological support, and accompanying them and helping them to find and to gather with their family if they don't find their family. No, that's in some cases very much more important than providing food aid, you know, or in some cases they might need also food, water, no, drinkable water, food, but also this psychosocial support, this accompaniment to help them to find their family, to know what's going on with the people they don't know about. Okay, it's just an example, no, to that we can see that the first immediate response, depending on the context, could be different, you know, and depending on what people feel they need, because sometimes there is a difference between what we as humanitarian workers think they need than what they feel they need. And it is very good that in this first assessment, if we ask people directly or through community neighborhood leaders, what they need, how they feel. No? And sometimes we as humanitarians, we forget to do that. No? And I've seen that many times, and I made that mistake also many times. If you allow me, and there are no more interventions by now about needs assessment, rapid needs assessment, and I would like to summarize a bit in a couple of slides about this, what are the key actions that should happen the first hours, and also some thoughts about some tips, some learnings about rapid needs assessment and needs assessment that I've prepared from my own experience, and I would like to share with you. And I would like to do that in 5 minutes, as quick as possible, as a recap, no, of the first part of this first part of the conversation. And then I would like to use the last 15-20 minutes to talk a bit about and to know your thoughts and to share minds as well about humanitarian coordination. Okay, so 1 second. Okay, can you see the slide with the 6 boxes? Hello? I'm just
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just confirming that the presentation is working well. Okay, so I mean, there are many other things, but from my experience, for what I've seen through many years, these 6 elements I think are extremely important and are the ones that we need to consider from the very first 24 hours and during the first days. And some of them you've already mentioned, but others you didn't. But I think I'm sure you know them and they are there. First of all, and we shouldn't forget about our office, staff, volunteers, people working with us, their safety and security. So how are they? How are we after the disaster? Because in some cases, I mean, in many disasters, it may happen that the first affected, and this is very common in earthquakes, no, and floods, but mostly earthquakes, sometimes internal conflicts, no, that we don't know what's going on with our people. We don't know what's going on with people working for our organization, and we need to know what's going on. We need to know how we are, because if we don't know how we are to deliver and to help us, we are failing, and we are failing first our own people, and we are failing those who we are working for. So that's clear. First of all, welfare, security, safety, our staff, our own organization. Then something we already discussed: humanitarian access, security, context. We need to do a context analysis. We need to analyze and to know which are the security hazards, which are what may happen in terms of security. We need to analyze if we can access or not on a specific location for different reasons. No? And for that, sometimes in our organization, we may not have direct access to information, to key information. That's why it's good to have alliances and contact with those organizations who have access to that information. ICRC, The International Committee of the Red Cross is one of the most important organizations, you know, working as a neutral organization on conflicts and situations in secure environments. So having contact with ICRC staff and people is very important, and we can do it, we should do it. And having contact also with, if there is a country where there is a blue helmets mission, or there is a military mission, foreign military mission, attending the security briefings, having contact with the military, and knowing from them how is the security situation in that context is also extremely important. And I know that some of you working in these secure environments, you know this already. The third one is first immediate response. You mentioned different examples, search and rescue teams, campaign hospitals to attend the injured, and temporary shelter for those who lost temporary shelter, water, sanitation, and hygiene. But the very first hours, drinkable water is very, very, very important, but also sanitary conditions and situation, and hygiene behaviors and situations as well to prevent further waterborne diseases and so on. The Rapidness Assessment, we already mentioned this. Also resource mobilization. If we don't have resources, we don't have money, we cannot work. We cannot support, we cannot provide humanitarian aid. And some donors, key donors, they are moving from the very first hours, and they are asking for proposals, they are asking for concept notes, they are asking their stakeholders, their partners, information, and they're okay. And those who are in a specific geographical area, sometimes the donors, they say, okay, could you help? Could you support the communities? If you are in a good position to provide humanitarian aid as soon as possible, we can finance you. We can provide you some resources to do so. But also internal resources. Most of the organizations, they got internal emergency funds. I mean, there are different names for this, but those are the emergency funding. That is like kind of reserve of funds, money that you can use in large disasters or in some disasters to deliver humanitarian during the first days, hours, while you mobilize and get new resources and funding. And the sixth one is about initial coordination and collaboration. We cannot wait to do coordination and collaboration with the government. When in countries where collaborating with the government can be done, because in some contexts, government is part of the conflict and collaboration with government is not recommended and it's not possible. But in those countries where the government has a leadership role and they got the primary responsibility to support the humanitarian response, we must and we should coordinate with the government. Governmental institutions at different levels, local, regional, national. And also other stakeholders, could be local NGOs, could be community-based organizations, could be private sector. In some countries, private sector, they play a role at local level, they got the resources, but also UN agencies, NGOs, and also the cluster system, or the thematic working groups. In some countries, we don't call them clusters. You know, the clusters are the different groups, sectorial groups, in which the UN system with all the humanitarian, with all the humanitarian agencies, they organize to provide and to ensure coordination amongst different sectors. Coordination of those who are providing water, sanitation, and hygiene, WASH, cluster. Education in emergencies, coordination amongst all the stakeholders providing and supporting humanitarian aid in education, protection cluster, health cluster, nutrition cluster, logistics cluster, etc. Okay, and then a summary of the Rapidness Assessment and things that, in my humble opinion and from my experience, we should not forget. And these are some of the tips or lessons, however you want to call them, that I feel we need to consider when we do a rapid assessment. And the first one is, it needs to happen within the first 48, 72 hours. And it's better timely, although incomplete assessment, than a perfect assessment but late, because we need to make decisions. We need to provide humanitarian aid, because in most of the disaster context, we are saving lives. We are saving people's life and people affected. And we need to be very clear about that. And it's better to make mistakes than not doing anything. Sometimes making mistakes, obviously we need to avoid mistakes, but sometimes we make some mistakes, but we reach the people. But if we say, oh, we don't know, we don't have information, what am I going to do? If we are paralyzed by the lack of information, then we are not providing timely humanitarian assistance. And there is what many organizations call the no regret approach, which means you make a decision, you move forward, you can make mistakes, but do not regret. That was the decision with information you had. You may change, you may adapt your decision in the future with more information, but the information you made is the one you could do and you thought was the best, okay? Then ensuring a multi-sectorial integrated approach. And also in the assessments and the initial, we talk a lot about protection, education, WASH, and so. But what about logistics and security? So we need also to include in the assessment logistics and security, because we cannot reach people if we don't know how are we going to do it. If we don't know if the access in terms of logistics can be guaranteed. Also, use of preliminary, I already confirmed, of unconfirmed data information. We need to work with estimations and in many cases with previous baseline information, if we get it. And from that baseline information that we had from before the disaster, we can make some estimations and projections, and we know how many people could be affected. We need also to rely on information from local organizations. One of you were mentioning this, partners, stakeholders, community leaders, local authorities. We should not forget rural, isolated, difficult access areas. Sometimes we focus our assessments in those areas that appear in media, that in urban areas or the surroundings of urban areas, and we forget about rural, isolated areas, which in some cases are much more affected, and we don't reach there. We make our life easy and we stay in the main capital or in the urban areas, but it's very important that someone try to get information from the other places where most of the humanitarian stakeholders are not present. And finally, do not forget that rapidness assessment is incomplete and sometimes inaccurate information that we need to complement, and then we need to go further with more in-depth full assessments. So, we are failing, and I know that in many organizations, including mine, we are failing on this. We organize all our humanitarian response based on the rapidness assessment information. We don't do in-depth assessments, and then we are overlapping. We are not getting people with the things they need because we are not doing full assessments on critical sectors. And now, I'm sorry if I took a bit longer. I mean, we are now is close to the hour we initially scheduled for the webinar. But if you want, I could stay for another 10-15 minutes if you want to stay, and we can briefly talk about and reflect about coordination and humanitarian coordination. And there you can see in the screen the key questions now about coordination. What should be considered in the humanitarian coordination during the first days? Why? What are the main challenges, constraints to coordination? How can we overcome them? Maybe you want to add some thoughts, or someone those who didn't participate yet, if maybe they want to add something or to say something on coordination and humanitarian coordination within the first days or after the disaster. Please open your mic or write down your inputs in the chat. No one wants to? You are very shy. If you don't, I will wait for a few seconds. If you are thinking, or if you don't worry, I can still share one slide I prepared about coordination, sharing with you my thoughts from my own experience in different contexts. Okay, I see here from Chiaram, common tools and language, let's say, and a strong leadership, that's clear. And this is very important about using sharing tools, because sometimes we got different methodologies from our organization. We know, and this is the way I do it. No? In this assessment, for instance, no? No, we do this way. No, we do the other way. The government has a different tool. And finally, we get involved in endless discussions about which methodology and tool are we going to use. And we never start a joint effort of a multi-sectorial, for instance, an interdisciplinary needs assessment. No, that's a good example. Common tools, common language. Difficulties to know who is already doing what. That's a good one. And what tools do we have to overcome that? What tools do we have in the humanitarian system sector, at least in theory? And in most of the countries, this is working, not as it should, but there are some tools that we use to know what's going on, who is doing what, where, when. Have you ever heard about 4 Ws, 3 Ws, 5 Ws, depends how many Ws you include there? About mapping, stakeholders mapping. So those are the tools we have, and that most of the thematic sectorial groups and cluster groups in some contexts under the leadership of OCHA, the UN agency for humanitarian coordination, that's their role, no? To make sure that in each cluster and in multi-cluster and multi-sectorial approach, that they do the humanitarian mapping, the mapping of humanitarian stakeholders, and that everyone knows what's going on, no? And the most famous is the 4 Ws, you know, which they call, which is about who, does, when, what, and where. No? So those are the 4 Ws. Okay, so I will take advantage, because I don't want to steal more of your time. I will take advantage of this last written intervention or thought to share my last slide with some elements about initial coordination, you know, and have already mentioned some of them. Things that I think we should not forget when we are talking. It's like a kind of checklist, no? Things that we should consider when we are doing or we want to do about initial coordination with other stakeholders. First, we need to consider and to know that coordination is critical to optimize resources, avoiding overlapping duplication of actions. I'm sure you could share with me examples, many examples of situations where you arrived to any specific community or any place with, let's say, for instance, high-end kids to support the high-end needs of population. And once you arrive to the community or to the place, someone is telling you, no, but I don't know. But UNICEF was here last week and we already have high-end kids. Why those things happen? Because we are not communicating one another, because we are not really sharing information through those tools of mapping of stakeholders, those maps of the 4 Ws, no? And knowing that other agency or other organization might be doing something in a different place, or the other way around. We are the first arriving to a specific community. We think we are the only ones. And once we've done our support to that community, a few days after, another organization or the government arrive and they do the same or similar. You know? So we are overlapping, we are duplicating, and we are giving, and this is very serious because we are giving double the humanitarian aid to one person and maybe another person is not receiving anything in other community. So that's why it's critical. Mapping, we already commented this. Collaboration and synergies enable an integral approach, amplifying the reach and the results. That's clear. I mean, this is not about 1 + 1 is 2, yes. But in my opinion, 1 plus by 1, by 2, by 3, that's multiplying. And if we are, and through collaboration, through synergies, we are multiplying efforts, and we are getting more and more, and we are reaching more people. And also, we need to make an effort from our own organizations, institutions, to be part and support sectorial and multi-sectorial coordination initiatives. I already mentioned this. Thematic groups, clusters, we have to participate there. We got to share information and to get information from others. We need to identify through the sectorial groups opportunities of collaboration, opportunities of doing things together with others, or at least information sharing. The most basic part of coordination is just information sharing to avoid overlapping. That is enough. But believe me, I've been involved in many situations of coordination in my humanitarian experience. And if you are open to other people to share your information, to say, okay, this is what I got, this is what I can offer, and they do the same, the results are extraordinary, because we can, doing things together, collaborating, we get and we do more. That's clear. And I mean, we don't have time now, but I could share you many examples of that really works. Collaboration. And sometimes we are reluctant. No, we say, no, if I'm sharing with you my ideas and what I'm going to do in my response, you are going to steal my ideas and you are going to put in your proposal, and you are going to the donor and they will finance your proposal and they won't finance mine. Excuse me for the bad language. That's bullshit. Collaboration, coordination is very important. And through collaboration and coordination, we get more. And our organization is always going to win. It's a win-win business, as the private sector says. And finally, government, public institutions must be part of the coordination. In most of the contexts, we know that in some contexts, local governments, the government are part, in case of internal conflicts or violence, they are part of the dynamic. So we cannot trust them, or we cannot coordinate with them because we are impartial, because we are neutral. But apart from those contexts, in most of them, government, public institutions, they got the primary responsibility to provide humanitarian aid because it's part of their mandate, because it's their population, because it's their country, because it's their region, because it's their whatever, their city. So we need to coordinate, to communicate with local public institutions, not only local, regional, national, at the level we may work. Except in those contexts, as I said, in which for different reasons we cannot, or we are not allowed to coordinate with the government, the governmental institutions. And that's all from my end, honestly. I passed already 10 minutes from the initial 1 hour. Sorry for that. My apologies. But there's so many things now and ideas to share, and sometimes I got motivated and emotional about what I do because it's my passion, and it's what I really like doing in my life. Please, we could take 5 minutes if you want before closing. If you got final questions, suggestions, thoughts before the closing, before I pass the word to Kalu Institute, to Carlos or Alberto, to close this webinar. But I could still take 5 minutes before closing. So feel free to share final thoughts if you want and if you wish.
Farinas has
Hi.
raised hand. Go ahead, please.
Hi. First of all, I would like to thank you so much for your experience and the information you shared. I personally, I haven't worked with the emergency crisis, but I have learned a lot from you and from the other friends that they have shared their experience and their knowledge. The only question always ticks in my brain is most of cases in emergency crisis, like they are people that are need in a great in the time of crisis that they really need support. And from the news or from the report that we read is always a lot of not at the time of the crisis that happens, let's say earthquake or tsunami or whatever happens, there is the time that it settles, and a lot of organization gets involved to go there and support the people. And they spend quite a lot of money, and they have a good budget for those. But at the still you see that the result is not as good as it should, because let's say if Red Cross is spending millions of dollars to help those, still people still need, still people are in the, you can see that they are there's no much improvement. Is it because the money is not being given to the people properly, or the organization are not doing their job properly, or there is something in between missing? Let's say from Haiti. I always wonder what happens, because if a non-for-profit organization is working and they are giving they have a good amount of fund for the to work on that sector, if it's let's say emergency, and there should be a changes, right? Like always have to be a good visible change.
Mhm. Okay, Parinas, I don't know if I'm pronouncing well your name, sorry.
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, Parinas, great. Well, you're asking the $1 million question, believe me. But I will try to share with you my thoughts. And I don't have the right answer to that. And that's the dilemma, honestly, and you are absolutely right. I mean, I've been in for more than 27 years working in this sector, and I've seen that many times. Failing in what we want to do, knowing that the money is not getting to the right people, that there are millions and millions invested in a specific project or in a specific context, but nothing changes, you know. And there are different, there is no one fits all answer to that, okay? There is no one right answer. I think there are different factors. And I'm telling you from my experience, okay?
Sure.
The first one is that there are, let's say, structural problems, situations that cannot be changed through short-term solutions, okay? That cannot be changed through humanitarian aid only. That need to be changed through profound, clear, longer-term investments and changes. And us, I mean, Red Cross, NGOs, even UN agencies, we don't have all the means and the power to make those changes, okay? That's why sometimes we make efforts, but we see that things doesn't improve or doesn't happen. And this is very clear in protective crises. This is very clear in those crises that are long-term humanitarian situations, no? Which happens quite often in conflict areas, you know? It could be in Syria, in Yemen, and many other, I mean, Colombia, in different continents, what we call the so-called protracted crisis, you know? And it's very demotivating. You are absolutely right. And you feel like, oh my God, what I'm doing here? What are we doing here? You know, if we are investing, we are supporting this and that community, and things doesn't change. Another factor usually is the culture factor. We don't do the right assessment. We don't do the right context analysis. And many things that we provide, or many ideas, good ideas that we try to implement, don't work just because we didn't do a social culture analysis, a right social culture analysis, and people, they just don't do it. They just don't buy it. They don't buy a new technology. They don't buy what we are offering. They don't believe in what we are telling them because they come from a different culture, because they are in a different context, because they think different than us, because their cosmovision is different. And we don't see that when we come from, I mean, in my case, I'm Spaniard from Europe. When we, the white, European, Occidental guys, humanitarian guys, we arrived to a different continent, to a different context, we fail to understand what's happening. That's another factor. There is another factor is corruption. Unfortunately, corruption happens. Unfortunately, those things happen, and nothing much to say when there is corruption and someone is taking on his own benefit part of the humanitarian aid, that is not going to get to people. And another factor is about having the know-how, the knowledge, the professionalism to do things in the right way. When I was very young, I had the opportunity to work in humanitarian context. I was very, very young, just after finalizing my university. And I made many mistakes. And I'm not proud of those mistakes, but I had the opportunity to learn through them. And now I can make less mistakes. I still make mistakes, but a few less mistakes, fewer mistakes. And that's something we need also to correct. We need to be more professional. We need to do things in the right way. We need to do things better. To see changes and to understand the content. So those are 4 factors that come to my mind now after your question, right, that in my opinion influence what you are saying, that we don't see the changes we would like to see. There is another one, the 5th one, which probably could be the same, the first. I mean, by the way, the factors I'm mentioning are not necessarily in the order I'm mentioning them. No, they could apply in different order. And another one is about funding and resources, and let's say the landscape, the system of funding, that sometimes donors, they say, okay, I can give you money for this and that because these are my priorities, but only for 1 year. But it may happen that the community, or the affected people, they need for a different purpose or for a longer term. But we don't find the right funding for longer term solutions and to do something more structured and more in depth and more according to the needs and to the context. No? So that's another, the funding, resources limitation is another factor influencing that thing. We don't see the changes we wanted to say. Okay, I don't know, Parinas, if I answered your question through all these elements.
Yeah, makes sense. I just have another question, if you don't mind. The other question I was thinking is from a donor's perspective. If you are a donor and you are working in a crisis area where there is an emergency need, do you still have to look for a concept paper or proposal to give a fund, or you can do your emergency work as quick as soon as you heard that there is need, and then you can look for the paperwork after? Like if you have to wait for the proposals and the people that they are in need, especially with their life is in danger, wouldn't affect them?
Okay.
Because
no, I got your question. I mean, that's, look, usually organizations, institutions, they got what we call the humanitarian funding or reserve funding, or and that's the funding that they got, let's say, in a reserve, no, in case an emergency happens. With that funding is the one you use to respond the first hours. The money is there, the resources should be there. I mean, medium, large organizations should have that. All of them have it. And then with that, you respond, okay? And then while you are responding, then you are preparing the concept notes, the proposals. Additional to that, most of humanitarian donors, they allow you to include in their proposals the money you have already spent, okay? Yeah, And that's very important because and then you get back that money to your contingency emergency fund. Okay, so
Right.
you use, let's say you got $1 million in your emergency contingency funding. Okay, and you are UNICEF. Sorry for giving the example of the organization I'm with now, but anyway, could be another one. So UNICEF spends that million providing hygiene kits, providing whatever drinkable water to children and adolescents and the communities in the affected by the earthquake. No? But then at the same time, is preparing a proposal, a concept note, because it's a preferred, is partner of ECHO, for instance, no? the European Union Humanitarian Aid Office, no? And they're preparing a proposal. No? They had conversations. It's okay. We are going. And ECHO says, okay, we are going to review 1 million or 1.5 million for this response. Prepare a proposal. Okay. While UNICEF is preparing that proposal of 1.5 million, is spending 1 million. But then they can include in that proposal that million. That means that in the end, they get back the million of their contingency funding or their contingency reserve, yeah, their reserve, yeah, and then they got an additional $500,000 to spend in the response, and they get money from other donors. That's the way usually happens, okay? But it also happens that sometimes there is no money, because this is happening when donors look at the situation with large emergencies, media emergencies, those who are on media. But sometimes there are situations that are not on media, and fund and resources don't arrive. In those cases, it's very, very difficult to be able to respond. But to finish my thoughts, you were talking about the paperwork. Paperwork is always necessary. You cannot avoid it. And it's very clear, it's because of, unless you got the money, unless you are someone who is millionaire and wants to spending some money without any paper, any paperwork. But for public donors, multilateral donors, they need to do the paperwork because there are rules, there are legislation, and this is what we call accountability. They have to be accountable to the countries or to the donor, to those who are giving that money, and they need to present and to show those numbers and to say, okay, you gave us, for instance, UN, they receive money from different countries, no? And you say, okay, you gave us money, and this is what we did with your money. So paperwork, when we are talking about large amounts of money, they must be there. Could be after in some cases, but should be there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know if someone else wants to say something finally. If not, if you allow me, I would stop here because we are abusing your time already. And I would like to thank you all for sharing, for being part of this webinar, for being part of this short, brief reflection on humanitarian needs assessment, coordination, the response during the first hours. As usual, it's a pleasure, and thank you, Kalu Institute, for allowing me to be part of this and be here. So now I say goodbye, or I say see you again. I hope we can see you again. And I pass the floor to Carlos, Alberto. I don't know who wants to close the webinar. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Iñigo. It has been very illustrative, and it has been a very, very good summary of what we have to keep in mind when there is an emergency and when we have to respond. We have talked about issues of needs assessment, about the concept paper, about the coordination, about funding, and all those topics are we going to is what we are going to see and study in the current model in the course, in the current model that will take us till mid-December. So I hope that you will see a relation between what is happening in the simulation and what Iñigo has been talking about and presenting, and what you are studying in the module. So stay tuned for what is happening in Tremante, and thank you again for being here, and see you all in the forum of the classroom. Thank you, and goodbye now, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.